Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Rachel Rubel. It's a partnership that may be more important than ever, especially when it comes to Syria. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow this week and discussed the 8-year-long conflict that has killed nearly 500,000 people. From the U.S. withdrawal to battling terrorist groups, both leaders have seen the stakes rise as questions about Bashar al-Assad's future slowly creep into the picture. Hassan Abdullah tells us more.
This handshake in August 2016 sought to revive relations between the two countries after they reached the lowest point in years. Just 9 months before this, Turkey had shot down a Russian fighter jet for violating its airspace. Russia had responded by imposing sanctions that, according to some estimates, cost Turkey nearly $8 billion in 2016. Fast forward just a couple of years later, and the two have agreed to take bilateral trade to an ambitious $100 billion a year. Last year, some 6 million Russians visited Turkey. Moscow plans to increase that figure. And it was Ankara's purchase of the S-400 missile system and a multi-billion-dollar pipeline deal with Moscow that raised suspicions among some Western countries that their traditional NATO ally was pivoting east. Despite this cooperation, contentious issues over Syria are starting to boil over. None is more glaring than Turkey and Russia backing opposing sides in the war.
We support the establishment of dialogue between the official Damascus Authority and the representatives of the Kurds. Such dialogue would certainly help in consolidation of the Syrian society and national reconciliation. It will be beneficial not only for Syria, but also for the neighboring states.
By Damascus Authority, Moscow means Bashar al-Assad. Ankara disagrees. It maintains that having killed 500,000 of his own people, Assad has lost legitimacy to rule and should be out of any long-term equation. While Erdogan and Putin disagree on Assad's future, they have found common ground in Syria's Idlib.
Terör örgütlerine karşı mücadelemiz aynı şekilde ortak devam edecektir. Çünkü terör örgütleriyle olan mücadeleler anlık mücadeleler değildir. Fakat bu mücadeleyi sürdüreceğiz çünkü hedefimiz orada Suriye halkının huzurunu, mutluluğunu sağlayabilmektir ve onlara orada göz açtırmamaktır. Bu dayanışmamızı teyit ettik.
The Russian president says he understands Turkey's security concerns. The Turkish president says Russia is on the same page over the plans for a safe zone along the border. This buffer zone is meant to minimize terror threats to Turkey from across the border in Syria. Both countries also support the US withdrawal from Syria and believe they should work together for regional stability. Turkey, Russia and Iran are working together for a solution to Syria. All three support Syria's territorial integrity and political unity. They also agree that Syrians should decide their future. And this is where Ankara believes that Assad staying in power is a major obstacle. It's unclear what sort of compromise the three would reach over Assad's future. For now, the Russian president says leaders of the three countries will be meeting again in Russia very soon. Hassan Abdullah, TRT World, Moscow.
And to discuss this further, joining me now is Ahmet Kasimhan, a professor at the Department of International Relations at Altanbash University in Istanbul, and Yuri Barman, an analyst at the Russian International Affairs Council, who focuses on the country's Middle East policy. Thank you both for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yuri, let me start with you. What were the main points of agreement between Turkey and Russia at the meeting between Erdogan and Putin?
It's actually very hard to come up with a kind of a set, list of agreements. I think that the two leaders definitely agreed on Idlib and on the need to fight terrorism in Idlib. On the issue of constitutional committee, there's clearly some agreement, but on the issue of the Syria's northeast, I think there's still a lot of disagreement going on.
And Ahmet, last year President Erdogan met with Putin almost more than any other world leader. Why has Russia become such a vital partner for Turkey?
Yeah, well, after especially the coup in 2016, the coup attempt, which caused a lot of agony in Turkey and a lot of misfit between Turkey its Western partners, Russia was always emerged as a very, if I can, empathetic listener and supporter of the Turkish thesis on both the coup attempt and on its concerns in Syria, especially after the parties made amend in May 2016, right before the coup attempt. This has been the case. And to be honest, Syria is one of the biggest problems, the most critical problem of Turkey. It involves elements that are called as at the level of importance that pertains to Turkey's survival by Turkish leaders. And in that area, in Syria, Russia basically is the party that calls the shots. It can open and close the airspace. It has presence on the ground. It creates facts on the ground that are very hard for the other parties to break or transform. That is why Turkey finds it critically important to cooperate with Russia, and especially in times that we are experiencing all those hardships in Turkey's relations with the West, as I have mentioned before. Russia emerges as a balancing act.
Yuri, Russia and Turkey at times have been supporting opposite sides in the war in Syria. Despite this, can you explain how the two leaders have been able to forge a strategic partnership?
On this, I agree with my colleague that Russia has managed to create facts on the ground that nobody can ignore, that it is acting as a balancing act for Turkey. So obviously, both countries see value in forging that strategic partnership. For Russia, Turkey is important not only in Syria, but also in Europe as well, with the kind of Turkey being the main element of Russia's energy equation in Europe as well. For Turkey, obviously, Russia is a very convenient partner when Turkey wants to build a more balanced relationship with the West. So it looks like they've been inching towards this cooperation and partnership for a very long time, and they finally come to realize that they need each other to achieve not only cooperation between them, but also gain valuable assets with partners beyond this region.
And Ahmet, the standoff in Idlib is still very much on both leaders' minds. What sort of progress have we seen on that front?
Well, there's clearly an agreement on fighting with HTS, which has gained a lot of ground in Idlib in the recent weeks. And that falls under the title of terrorism, fighting with terrorism for both parties. Turkey obviously doesn't want to experience an influx of additional refugees from Idlib, which is what is going to exactly happen if Russia and the Assad regime starts a military operation in a manner uncoordinated with Turkey in Idlib. So Turkey definitely wants to coordinate with Russia on that, because it cannot directly coordinate with the Assad regime. Russia seems to be the proper interlocutor that is also able to deliver. However, as to how this is going to be achieved, I think we have to wait and see what the practical outcome of all those talks would be in Idlib. And for that, I think we have to look at late spring.
Well, the future of Bashar al-Assad came up during the meeting. How stark are the differences between Erdogan and Putin on his future?
I think this is one of the things where they cannot reconcile their positions. I think Russia's red line is that he is staying in power until the next presidential election. Turkey's position on that, and in fact the position of many countries around Syria, has been changing continuously. I think Turkey's position has not changed a bit either, but at the end of the day, Ankara will have to accept that as long as Russia backs Bashar al-Assad as the president of Syria, he is there to stay. However, the next presidential elections that are taking place in 2021, a lot could happen by then, obviously. And I think this is maybe next year is where we're going to see a lot of new personalities emerging in Syria, now that Syria is kind of moving into a different period of its development. And there's been a lot of talk, actually, that Russia is looking for alternative personalities to replace Bashar al-Assad. All this talk, there's been a lot of rumors, but none of that has materialized so far.
Ahmet, talk to us a little bit more about Turkey's position on Assad. We heard Erdogan say that it's crucial not to allow a power vacuum in Syria after the withdrawal of U.S. troops. And what did he mean exactly by that?
Well, what he means is reflective of what Turkey's concerns are, which is to say if the Americans leave immediately, which is something that Putin also has underlined, there will be a power vacuum in those areas that the Americans are holding under control with YPG-PKK forces. And that is going to create an area where basically ISIS might go back into, and B, in the power vacuum that occurs, probably in the back of the president's mind, the Turkish president's mind, the regimes creeping into those areas is also a problem, which I don't think that the Russians would see as constituting an issue. And C, he also doesn't want to see that YPG-PKK forces are controlling large swaths of the area, leading them to be able to have an exchange with the regime in terms of opportunities to build cooperation. And those are all stuff that would dent Turkey's interests one way or the other, even though they are entirely different scenarios at times, which would create entirely different realities on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yuri, President Putin has stated many reasons why coordination and shared interest between the two countries is imperative. But is there anything that can come between them, like American or Israeli interests in Syria?
The first thing is obviously the Americans, and it's clear that the Americans are looking for ways to build a stronger relationship with Ankara, especially against the backdrop of President Erdogan promising to buy, and actually already committing to buy the S-400 air defense systems from Russia. So obviously this is a very kind of alarming signal to the Americans. America will be the first country to do that. I think there's a lot of kind of movement now in the Arab world to come back to Syria and to start talking to the Assad government. So that down the line, that could also possibly put some constraints on the Russia-Turkey relationship.
Mm-hmm. And what is crucial for Turkey in the outcome of Astana framework at the next meeting with Iran?
Well, definitely Turkey wants to reach to a final end state in Syria where Bashar al-Assad is not present. And frankly speaking, from where I look at it, I have been for a very long time commenting on the fact that the Russians would get rid of Assad at one juncture or another down the road. And I think that time is coming. So for the Russian party, that is not a problem. But for the Iranians, Assad might be actually a more critical issue. They would like him to stay. At least they would like to control the transfer of power in Damascus, which is a contentious point between Russia and Iran too. So in that, Turkey will be probably siding with Russia and try to convince Iran on the outcome. The other issue, which is still very important, is Idlib, of course, because that is not going away. Obviously, Idlib will continue to be the thorn on the side of those relations and a thorn on the side of Turkey, to be honest, especially up until March when Turkey will be experiencing a domestic election. And the other very critical issue will still be the east of Euphrates.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both for coming in today, Ahmet Han and Yuri Barman.
Thank you.
They've been called the most persecuted minority in the world, but global outcries against Myanmar's crackdown on Rohingya Muslims haven't caught up with real global action. Instead, some countries are reversing course and deporting entire families back to Bangladeshi refugee camps, and some to Myanmar itself. With hundreds of other Rohingya refugees stuck in limbo and awaiting their fate, it's not clear if these forced deportations will end anytime soon. Courtney Keeley has more.
This recent video shows dozens of Rohingya about to be deported from Saudi Arabia. They were reportedly held in a detention center in Jeddah after overstaying visas are discovered to have no legal paperwork at all. Since Saudi officials don't recognize the Rohingya as a nationality, even though they are from Myanmar, they can't be returned to their home of Myanmar. Bangladesh has agreed to accept them. And earlier this month, India expelled its second group of Rohingya refugees back to Myanmar, upsetting human rights groups. Elements within India's Hindu nationalist government have labeled the Rohingya illegal migrants and a security risk, and have ordered that tens of thousands currently in the country be identified and repatriated. Altogether, those being deported make up just a fraction of the more than 700,000 who fled to neighboring Bangladesh in 2017 after Myanmar's army launched a brutal campaign of violence and rapes against civilians. The UN called it a genocide, while authorities in Myanmar claimed it was in response to a series of armed attacks by militants. They also claimed that the Rohingya set fire to their own villages. But it's yet another symbol of the decades of persecution they have faced since Myanmar's military government took power in the 1960s and stripped the Rohingya of citizenship in 1982. The Rohingya are considered to be one of the most persecuted groups in the world.
We like the idea they are telling us that we won't be returned by force. Don't take us. If you have to take us by force, then it is better if you throw us under the wheels of a car or kill us by throwing us into the sea.
Forcing them back to Myanmar could be a violation of international law, and voluntary repatriation has also proved difficult.
Things have been too slow, and one of the dramatic aspects when you fail in solving the root causes of a problem is that violence then tends to erupt again.
Despite years of UN and human rights activists' pleas for the Rohingya issue to be resolved peacefully, it looks unlikely that could happen anytime soon. Courtney Keeley, Straight Talk.
And to discuss this further, joining me now is Abdul Hakim Mahmoud, who is an aid worker at the Turkish humanitarian relief organization, IHH. And from London, joining us is Anna Shea, a researcher and legal advisor for refugee and migrant rights at Amnesty International. Thank you both for joining me today. Anna, I want to start with you there in London. We heard from the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Yong-Hee Lee, at a news conference condemning the Myanmar government for its treatment of the Rohingya. Do you think this will have an impact?
It's hard to say at this point whether it would have an impact. It's hard to understand what will speak to the Myanmar authorities, given that in recent years the security forces have committed crimes against humanity, and what is happening now has been called by the United Nations to be apartheid, and that the security forces were acting with genocidal intent. So the situation is extremely serious, and it's too early to tell at this stage what impact this will have.
Let me get to my guest in the studio, Abdul Hakim. I know you've spent some time among the Rohingya. What are their living conditions like, and what is it that they need most?
Their living conditions are not as good as it could be. Like they need mainly shelters, like bamboo shelters, because at the moment they are living in a tent. So as you know, Bangladesh is a monsoon country. So when there is too much rain, they face really difficulties to stay in Bangladesh in the camps. So I would say they need, the main thing is bamboo shelters for the Rohingyas, and another thing is education for their future, because everybody discusses about their past, but we need to consider their future from now on.
Okay, let me get back to Anna in London. Anna, Amnesty International was particularly concerned about several Rohingya men who were sent back to Myanmar by the Indian government. Why did the Indian legal system fail to protect these men?
Well, I mean, the Indian authorities have, beginning in late 2017, have announced a plan to return to their home countries all so-called illegal migrants. And Indian authorities have taken a position that all Rohingya in India are effectively not there legally. So this kind of announced plan to basically expel an entire population violates India's obligations under international law. It's not permitted to simply expel an entire population without any fair process.
Mm-hmm. Another country that's faced criticism is Saudi Arabia. They claim they're following their immigration laws by deporting Rohingya. Is the criticism warranted that they aren't doing enough, considering their enormous wealth and their place in the Muslim world?
Absolutely, yes. Saudi Arabia is also bound by the same rule as India in not being permitted to expel groups of people without a fair process to determine whether those people will face serious human rights violations after their expulsion. And as you say, Saudi Arabia is an immensely wealthy country that could well afford to support many refugees, not only Rohingya. And Saudi Arabia absolutely should implement an asylum policy and grant access to the UN Refugee Agency to these people. And the detention center that we've heard about in Jeddah, where migrants are being held, is very disturbing accounts of arbitrary detention, and these people should be immediately released. There's no clear grounds for these people to be detained at all.
Abdul Hakim, what is the IHH doing specifically on the ground to help the Rohingya?
In the field, our main project is bamboo shelters at the moment. We constructed just over 8,000 bamboo shelters. We got 5 childcare houses, which means education center and also rehabilitation. We have got 1 medical camp where almost like 200 Rohingyas get treated every day on average. We also do distributions like food packets, hygiene packets, and also winter relief, cooked meals. So we try to give everything they need to the Rohingyas according to their needs.
Okay, and Anna, what more can the international community do to help the Rohingya? I mean, should they be offering more money, offering asylum, or pressuring the government in Myanmar to do more?
All of the above. I mean, the international community has been woeful in its response to this refugee situation. In 2018, just over 4,000 Rohingya refugees were resettled. That's 4,000 out of a population of, just in Bangladesh, there are over 1 million people. So, first of all, the international community needs to bring people to safety from countries that are already hosting large numbers of refugees, like Bangladesh. It needs to fully fund the humanitarian response, which it has not done yet. As of late last year, the United Nations Appeal Fund for Rohingya crisis was only 70% funded. So absolutely it needs to give more money. And as you say, it needs to pressure the Myanmar authorities to have immediate accountability for the crimes that the security forces have committed and to recognize Rohingya as citizens, which they have failed to do for decades now. So the Rohingya are effectively stateless and are not recognized as full citizens and human beings in their own country.
Well, what about Bangladesh? I mean, can Bangladesh continue to cope with supporting hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees?
I mean, Bangladesh should be recognized for allowing these people into the country. In mid-2017, they were already hosting 400,000 Rohingya. And then over the course of 5 months in 2017, another 700,000 people came, fleeing these crimes against humanity and terrible atrocities in their home country. So absolutely, we should recognize that Bangladesh has allowed these people to stay. But on the other hand, Bangladesh needs to do more to recognize these people as refugees. I mean, the government fails to do this. And it has provided some humanitarian assistance, but the basic essential needs of these people are not being comprehensively met, despite the humanitarian organizations that are present. Bangladesh needs to partner more with international organizations, with other international humanitarian agencies to make sure that these people's essential needs are met. And the other thing that Bangladesh should not do is to start repatriating to Myanmar these people, which, according to an agreement signed between Myanmar and Bangladesh late last year, there are plans to start evicting and expelling these people back to a situation which is, I mean, crimes against humanity were very recently being committed. And as we heard from the UN Special Rapporteur, there's still very serious concerns about the crimes being committed against the Rohingya people. So it is not safe for anyone to be forced back to Myanmar at this present time.
Okay, Abdul Hakim, why does Turkey have a special concern for the Rohingya?
Turkey always has a special concern for all oppressed people all around the world. It's not just Rohingya, but with the Rohingya there is something special from Ottoman period. During the First World War, the Rohingyas have helped Turkey by sending 220 sterling. Most of the people, they don't know this, but the relation between Rohingya and Turkey started a long time ago. Also, as IHH, we also started working for Rohingya since 1996. So we had a good connection with them. And after like few crises, we have always tried to be there for them, and we are also trying to do as best as we can with the help of Turkish people and also international community.
All right, we will have to leave it there. Abdul Hakim Mahmoud and Anna Shea in London, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Rachel Rubel. If you have any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.